Hello YouTube subscribers, I am Luke Skypainter, and the Artists' Rebellion needs your help. This is our most desperate hour. Many paintings done with Alizarin Crimson have already begun to fade, and I fear without these great works of art, the galaxy will be plunged into darkness. Here are 2 tubes of red-violet paint that can replace the evil crimson and restore the galaxy to light fastness. You must see these safely to the artist's colony on Ardaran. Help me, subscribers. You are my only hope. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. As you can see, I've got these 2 tubes of paints here that were given to me by my friend Luke Skypainter. And we'll take a quick look at those. And these are the 2 colors that I recommend, the top 2 choices for replacing Alizarin Crimson on a palette. These are oil paints, of course. So the first one is Rembrandt's Permanent Matter Deep. And this is the one that is the most straightforward, out-of-the-box substitute for Alizarin Crimson. The shade is almost the exact same color. Now the other one that I recommend, which is actually the one that I would probably recommend more strongly, is Quinacridone Magenta. Now this is the Lucas version, which they call Magenta / Primary Red. But the important thing to remember is, regardless of the name, whether it's called Primary Red, Quinacridone Magenta, sometimes just Permanent Magenta, is that the pigment number, which is always the same, will be Pigment Red 122. It's the same magenta that's used in process printing, like in the 4-color process. So that is the color that I think is the best one to replace Alizarin Crimson with, because it's the most versatile, and I'll show you why that is. So just a quick recap. Alizarin Crimson is a pigment from the 1800s that was and still is very, very popular. The problem with it is, though, it's not very permanent, and it does fade relatively quickly. And for artists who are starting out, maybe that's not such a big deal. But if you're looking to get very serious about your art, or you're already a well-established artist and you're thinking about selling your work, or you want to sell your work, you are selling it, you want to avoid pigments that are going to fade quickly. And Alizarin Crimson is one of the big problem ones. And a lot of artists still use it and still recommend it, and it's something that is concerning because it will fade within a single person's lifetime if it's exposed to direct sunlight a lot. So quickly, just to show you what I'm talking about, this is a sample of some swatches from handprint.com, a website run by Bruce McAvoy, who did a lot of extensive testing. Now these are watercolors, which is worse for Alizarin Crimson than oils, for sure. But still, it shows the example. If you look at the example on the left-hand side, you can see what happens to the Alizarin Crimson swatches after they've been exposed for 800 hours of sunlight. And if you have a painting that you've done, let's say with Alizarin Crimson, 800 hours of sunlight, let's say it gets 2 hours a day, in a year, that's what will happen to your pigments. Whereas the right-hand side sample is the Pigment Red 264, also known as Pyrrole Ruby, which is the Rembrandt color that I showed you earlier, the Permanent Matter Deep. That's the same sample exposed to the same amount of sun, and you can see it's barely faded at all. So you want to avoid using pigments that are going to fade within the artist's lifetime. If you're not concerned about your work hanging in a museum 500 years from now, that's probably not something that you or even I need to be concerned about. But if you are going to sell your work, you don't want an angry client coming back in 20 years and saying, hey, my painting's faded. So that's why you want to use these alternate pigments. So just quickly to show you, I'll start out by showing you this little swatch book that I made. Now this is This here on the left this is a sample of genuine Alizarin Crimson. And as you can see, the Rembrandt Permanent Matter Deep, which is here right next to it, is almost identical. In fact, looking at it with my eyes rather than through the camera lens, it looks exactly the same. I cannot tell which one is which. So, like I said before, the Permanent Matter Deep from Rembrandt, in this one, is a straightforward, out-of-the-box, absolute, one-for-one substitute for Alizarin Crimson. And this is another example of permanent Alizarin Crimson from Blue Ridge, but theirs is a mixture, whereas the Rembrandt is a single pigment color. So, quickly, just to show you that color, if I mix that with a little bit of white, you can see that it has that same quality that genuine Alizarin Crimson has, which is that when you mix it with white, that deep ruby red kind of has the pinks that it makes has a little bit of a dusty, warm, neutral tone to it. So it doesn't make bright pinks that are really saturated. And that's can be a desirable thing in certain situations, but the problem is with that, with the genuine color and using this, is that let's say you wanted a really super bright saturated pink, this is the best you're going to be able to do. Whereas if you use the Quinacridone Magenta, which is what I use on my palette, you can see the difference here, how much more bright and saturated of a color that is. And it's always easier to start here and go to here if you need to by mixing another color in. But if you have this and you want this, there's nothing you can do. You can't make a color that's more saturated and more bright from one that isn't. But you can always start at the top and go down. So that's why ultimately I think the Quinacridone Magenta is the more versatile one and the better one to have, because you can actually mimic the color of Alizarin Crimson by mixing in a little transparent oxide red. You could also use burnt sienna. If you mix in a little bit of that with this, it imparts that same sort of brownish warmth that the genuine Alizarin Crimson or this Permanent Matter Deep has. And you can see it you can kind of create the same color by just mixing in that transparent oxide red. But if you needed to, see, now this looks just like the tint out of the Alizarin Crimson here. So if you needed to, you could create this, but you would have the option of having that really bright saturated pink if you needed that too. So like I said, the Quinacridone Magenta is definitely the one that's the most versatile. And I had just real quick, one of my viewers asked me to do a sample of mixing the colors with Flake White rather than titanium white, which is what this is here. So just real quickly, I'll mix some of this out with Flake White, which is what I actually use in my palette. But the Flake White just has a tendency to make mixtures that are a little bit warmer, because Flake White is a slightly warmer white, but it's got a lower tinting strength. So you can see by mixing in the color with it, it's ever so slightly warmer, and it takes more of the white to create the same tint. So the white won't, you'll need less of the color if you use Flake White. And it does give slightly more saturated colors because it doesn't quite have the opacity that titanium white does. So that's an example of mixing those same two colors with Flake White. And as you can see, the color's a little nicer, which is what I actually use. It's just that I typically use titanium white for my demos because it's a white that's more commonly used by artists who are just starting out. They're probably going to be used titanium white rather than the Flake White. And Quinacridone Magenta also makes a great dark. If you mix it with a little phthalo green, You can get a nice, dark neutral tone for darks that isn't going to fade on you the way Alizarin Crimson will. But the thing is that you'll often hear artists say, well, Alizarin Crimson, if you use it full strength in oils, then it's less likely to fade. And that's true. It is true. That is true to a degree. But my feeling is, why risk it? Why take a chance? Use something that's permanent, and then you'll never have to worry about it. But the real problem is, for anyone who's trying watercolors, I would recommend staying away from Alizarin Crimson, because watercolors are transparent. They're often laid down in thin, translucent or very light layers, because that's the nature of what watercolor is. And the more thin and the more light gets in between those pigment particles, the more quickly that it's going to fade. So even in oil painting, if you have it tints with a lot of white in it and just a little bit of the genuine color, that's going to fade just like the watercolors. So hopefully this will help you. Like I said, I recommend, if you're using Alizarin Crimson, replacing it with one of these two colors, the Rembrandt Permanent Matter Deep or the Quinacridone Magenta. Now that's for oils. If you want to use these two colors for watercolors, then you look for Pigment Red 264 is the straight out of the box substitute, and the Pigment Red 122, which is the Quinacridone. So I hope that you have found this video helpful, and that you enjoyed watching it, and that it will help you in making some good decisions for picking colors. Thank you, my faithful art apprentices. You have taken the first step to creating paintings that will stand the test of time. You have done well. May the arts be with you, always.